So this will be a great, thank you. So welcome. We'll do introductions. Go in the order of the screen. Just identify if you're from an agency or if you're one of the Paratoxic Science Advisory Committee members. David, start with you.
Yes, David Fair. I'm a toxicologist with the Oregon Health Authority.
All right, thank you. Apple.
Hi, Apollonia. You can call me Apple, and I am the program coordinator for Cleaner Air Oregon with the Department of Environmental Quality.
Thank you. Susan Tilton.
And hi, everybody. This is Sue McMillan. I'm here to kind of help out with CAO and what they're doing, primarily because I led the old ATSAC, which finished up in 2017.
Okay, thank you. Susan Tilton.
Hi, I'm Susan Tilton. I'm at the in the Environmental and Molecular Toxicology Department at Oregon State University.
And an ATSAC member. Thank you, Susan.
ATSAC member.
Yep, JR.
Hi there, my name is J.R. Giska. I'm the Cleaner Air Oregon Program Manager with the Department of Environmental Quality.
Thank you. Dana.
Hey everyone, I'm Dana Crosby. I'm the program coordinator for Oregon Health Authority's Toxics program.
Thank you. Holly.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly Dixon at Oregon Health Authority. I'm a public health toxicologist.
Okay, let's go. John Boudreau.
Good morning. I'm a toxicologist on the Air Toxic Scientists Advisory Committee. And pre-retirement, I was with the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment.
Thanks, John. John Vandenberg.
John Vandenberg, I'm with Duke University. And before I retired at EPA after 36 years there and have served on the former ATSAC committee that finished up back in 2017. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Daisy.
Yeah, my name is Daisy Lu. I'm a staff toxicologist at the Department of Pesticide Regulation. There I did work on risk assessment. So it's also from Cal EPA. EPA is at the Cal EPA. I'm an ATSAC member. Thank you.
Thank you. And John Stanek.
John Stanek, US EPA in RTP, North Carolina, toxicologist. I've been here for 22, 23 years. Also a committee member.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. And then Angela.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Hesenius, and I'm with the Kearns and West facilitation team.
And Ben Duncan will be facilitating today with Kearns and West. So I think we got everybody. Thank you. Welcome again. A little bit of housekeeping, and then I'm basically going to pass it over to Holly and JR, who will take us through the rest of our day. So if we go to the next slide, just as a reminder for our ATSAC members, you all are here as panelists, which obviously you just modeled. You have the ability to speak, to use the chat. We are recording this meeting. They will be, all these meetings will be on the ATSAC website. We've made closed captioning available. So on the bottom of your screen, you CC or show captions. That's helpful for your participation. For folks that are joining as public members on the webinar, there's no chat, and Q&A is also not available. And we'll talk about other parts of this process where you are able to engage, but really this is a conversation for the ATSAC as panelists today. So welcome. Your participation as observers is helpful, but you won't be able to kind of more deeply engage. Let's go next slide. JR, I'll pass it to you to kind of talk about the overall timeline structure for this process.
Thanks, Ben. I just want to say welcome back and thank you to the ATSAC members here. We couldn't do this process without you, so really appreciate you all being here and spending your time and energy on this really important work for our agency. This is really just a reminder for the public that's here attending, and maybe for the ATSAC members as well, but we are required to review and update our toxicity reference values at a specified frequency and rule. Right now, that's a 3-year review, and this is our first iteration of that process. And so, what it really requires is sort of a 2-step process, which is we review authoritative sources, we develop these proposals, and then we bring it to this committee here, the Air Toxic Science Advisory Committee, for review and discussion. As a reminder, the ATSAC is a non-decision making body. It's really for input to the process and feedback on DEQ and OHA's proposals. And then once we have all of that information, we will take it back internally. And if there are revisions or updates to our proposals, we would make those. And then at that point, as you can see here in the middle of the infographic, that's sort of when the rules sort of process kind of formally starts, and we'll have a rules advisory committee. As Ben mentioned, today there's no chat and communications really from the public allowed during this meeting. And these work and any ATSAC meeting except for the petitioner review meeting that we held, meeting number 3. That's because again, the ATSAC's time is very valuable for us, and we need to spend that time allowing them to have the conversations they need to have. The public process will come in during the rules process, is typical of our rulemaking process. So we will have a rules advisory committee composed of members of the public. And then we also will have a formal public comment period. We also, at the end of that formal public comment period, if we do need to address items and issues that come up that we need to bring back to ATSAC, we will do that, and we will engage ATSAC on some of the follow-up there. So now is not the time for public involvement, but we will have plenty of time for that, and we will give the public plenty of time to review our proposals before that public comment. And again, as needed, if we need to come back to ATSAC, we will do that. So I think that's all I'm going to say here, and I'm going to pass it on over to Holly Dixon.
Great, thanks, JR. I wanted to briefly start, I think I have 2 or 3 slides, but by reviewing the agenda for today. So after my introduction slides, we'll have 2 one-hour ATSAC discussion periods, which will be separated by a break. And after those discussion periods, I will briefly wrap up, go over next steps, and answer any remaining questions you might have about process. And on the next slide, I just have a quick reminder that all the materials can be found on the ATSAC webpage. And these slides will be posted later today as well. And we'll put a link in the chat to this ATSAC webpage. So the next slide is just a reminder of the plan for this current series of meetings. So in mid-January, we had our kickoff meeting, which was meeting number 4. And at that meeting, we introduced you all to the TRV update materials. So today is day 1 of a series of 3 meetings where we'll actually discuss those TRV proposals. And today is ATSAC meeting number 5. ATSAC meeting number 6 is tomorrow. And then next Wednesday is meeting number 7. And so we expect that you all will discuss those overall TRV update proposals and the overall process at these meetings and provide us with feedback. While planning for these meetings, as you can probably imagine, it was hard to know how much time we would need for each of the discussion questions that we put together. So therefore, it is possible we might not need ATSAC meeting number 7. Just depends how far we get on those discussion questions during each meeting. And for this last row here, we did make a change to our plan for meeting number 8 since the last time we met, and wanted to highlight that here. We're moving that diesel particulate matter discussion to a separate meeting altogether and not combining it with the discussion during meetings 5 through 7. So our new tentative plan is that we'll have that meeting sometime in May. And we have not yet sent out that diesel particulate matter framing document that we talked about last time, but we'll make sure that we send that to you with enough time to review before meeting number 8. So then I have one more slide. So as we mentioned at our last meeting, we planned all these February meetings around that discussion question document that we're referring to as document 3. And that one is online, and we also emailed it to you as a Word document version, so you could type in your notes. And the order of the questions in that document are the order that we're planning to discuss them today. So wherever our discussion ends in that document today, we'll pick up on the next discussion question at the start of tomorrow's meeting. And we really encourage you to use that Word document version to keep track of your notes and record your answers. And we totally expect that you might change some of your answers after hearing the group discussions today. And I wanted to reiterate that we'd really appreciate a copy of your final version of your answers to those questions in writing after the final meeting wraps up, which is meeting number 7 in this series. And so today we plan to discuss some of the questions one at a time, and other questions we plan to discuss them in small groups of related questions. So like 2 to 4 questions where we think your answers might have some overlap. And when we're planning to discuss more than one question at a time, we've put them on the same PowerPoint slide. And during the discussion, we'll stop sharing our PowerPoint slides so we can more easily see each other and have a discussion. And Ben will call on people during the discussion. And when the discussion kind of wraps up, Ben will then facilitate kind of a roundtable discussion where we can get everyone's final thoughts and wrap up before we move on. So that was kind of our plan for today. Try to set it up before we launch into discussion, which is the next section. We can go to that. And maybe I'll just pause there for a second and see, are there any clarifying questions on our plan for today before we kind of launch into discussion?
John Vandenberg.
I was just going to say, not from me. It's very clear. Thank you.
Okay.
So with that, we'd like to start the first hour of discussion. On this next slide, you'll see they're organized by kind of these subsections that we put into document number 3 for these discussion questions. The first grouping was called overall process questions, and they're on the next slide listed out. And I put 3 questions on this one slide together, as I thought some of your answers might apply to all 3 of these questions. And feel free to just answer one at a time, though, if you'd prefer to kick off the discussion, or all 3 together if that's easier for you. I will read the questions out loud for those that are attending the Zoom and listening in. And then Dana will also put the questions in the chat that you can kind of follow along on ATSAC document 3 as well. So these first 3 questions are, do you feel prepared to go through these discussion questions? What was your experience like preparing for this review process as an ATSAC member? And the final question on this slide is, do you agree with DEQ's and OHA's overall process for reviewing and updating TRVs? So with that, take the slide down and kind of just open it up for these first 3.
Right, and hopefully folks, these questions all feel familiar because they were in your document packet. So just at this high level, as Holly just laid out, you can kind of go in whatever direction you want with these 3. John Vandenberg, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I guess I have a question to go back I should have asked before. And that is, in going through the materials, there are a lot of links. And I was following some of those links through, which is very impressive. I think links were very, very helpful to the process. So thank you for doing that. Is it correct to assume that when this process goes forward to the Rules Committee, the Finance, and so forth, that our comments as we're writing them out on these documents will be attached to some of the materials that are available in the subsequent steps? Is that correct?
Yes, thanks for that question. We're planning on, I don't exactly know how all of this will be written up, but anything you provide in writing, we were going to compile and create kind of a compiled document that we post online and provide to the subsequent committees. And then in some format, whatever makes the most sense, depending on the feedback we receive during these meetings. I imagine that we will have some sort of updated, here's the steps we took to make changes since we heard ATSAC feedback and what they are, and then present those to those committees. So that will definitely be a work step for us to convey that information as we get into those committee steps.
So in effect, you're going to have a response to comments. It may not be specific to each individual comment that we make, but at least in general, you have a response to comments, it sounds like.
Yeah, and a summary of kind of like main thematic or contaminant specific changes that we make in response to your comments.
That's very clear. Thank you very much. So I guess just to jump into it, I actually have two computer screens going. So if I'm looking over here, it's because I'm trying to look at my notes I've been typing out. In terms of prepared, I'd say, yes, there's a lot of information here. And so I appreciate splitting the discussion across a couple of different sessions, which will give me and the others a chance to think about our views on these things. So I'm glad we're not doing it in just straight through. It does help to have a break in between for me. So thank you for that. It is a lot, and there's a lot of materials. I found myself, as I just kind of pointed out, clicking on different links and sort of trailing down into the system, if you will. And there's a lot of links. In fact, probably well over 1,000 links there. And so I didn't do all of them. I just did case examples to kind of, particularly for areas that I was most familiar with, I dug in to see what you were referring to. So again, I think it's appropriate. I felt well prepared. I could spend a lot more time checking everything, but I think that in a spot checking way, I feel quite confident that the materials you provided are the ones I need to see. So thank you for that. So I might go ahead and give my comments on the second one, which is my experience is I've been very impressed by the clarity of the communications by the team, you know, the team that you've got, both OHA and DEQ, as well as the contractors. The materials are well organized. And I think that's a real hallmark from what I'm seeing here is that you've presented a lot of information to us in a way that is relatively easy for us to understand what you want, what you did, and what your process is. So thank you for that again. It seems, you know, very well organized and coherent, and that's really sometimes not the case when you're doing reviews. So I appreciate that. It was very, very helpful. And then the overall process, the only thing that I have a question about here, and it may be that it should come up later, and you can stop me if that's the case, is that as I drilled down into it, I found that in some cases, there was a lack of clarity about, and maybe this is in the TRV process, is in terms of the way you're handling a rounding in significant digits. And my comment here comes in part because I have a lot of familiarity with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards process. And that rounding and the clear characterization of significant digits is very, very important there. And here I didn't see any discussion of that I could find anyways. Now, maybe it's there, I just didn't see it. But I think it's important that in some cases I see 2 significant digits and in other cases 1 significant digit being used. And they are different in terms of how it's used to calculate out the risk value. So I did a series of calculations as an example using the values that are in the workbook 1, I guess, where it has all chemicals, that I took the unit risk factor that I found, say for an iris, multiplied it times the value that was shown for specific chemicals. And I did this for a set of them. And I found that the rounding does make a difference in terms of whether it is a 1 in a million risk or 1.6 in a million risk, which would round to 2 in a million if you rounded it that way, or 1.5, which, you know, it makes a difference. And so what I'm saying is that I think it needs to be really clear what your strategy is, what your approach is in terms of significant digits and rounding of values. In the iris assessments, some of the values there are going to be intermediate values are done in 2 significant digits or even 1. And in other cases, it's just 1 digit. So again, it's a mixed world out there. And I suggest that you be as clear as you can on this point. So again, I don't know if that goes in here, but it's the overall process, I guess, is why I'm raising it now, is that I was a little bit unclear what your strategy was there. So that's it for the first comments.
Thanks, John. So I don't know, Holly, Dave, if you want to respond or want to let the group kind of discuss, because John, I think you just put something in the middle that feels really important to talk more about. And it might come up in the quality control piece team. I'm not sure, but anything you want to respond at this point, David?
Yeah, I can't, I'm trying to remember where we wrote this down or if we did in the materials that we sent, but what our practice was, we used all digits in every calculation step up until we got to the actual TRV. And at the TRV step, we rounded to 2 significant digits. In practice, I think that the way that it's implemented at like a facility specific risk assessment is that they use the TRV or the risk-based concentration, which is very similar, rounded to 2 digits, and that's what they use to calculate risk. So when we in our derivation process, we used all digits up until we get to the final TRV, which we round to two significant figures.
So in some cases, it may be presented as in the proposed TRV just as one digit. That's what I'm getting to. Is you're like, you've got 0.0002 for a value for like Aldrin. You can fix that. I'm not sure how you fix that, but it could be 0.00020 would be clear,
right?
You know, instead of 2, because 2 is a little bit murky to me compared to some of the other ones that have, you know, 0.11 or 0.23 or something like that. So it may be just the way that the structure of the Excel spreadsheets are set up, but that's something to consider, is that people will interpret that differently. If it's
right.
0.0002, they might say, well, that means 0.0024 is fine, when in fact you might mean 0.0020. I don't know.
Yeah, in some cases where we adopted a TRV from another agency, if they presented it as one significant figure, we just used what they presented. So I guess it could differ. The ones that where we made tweaks ourselves, like in document 4, where we were doing a lot of the calculation ourselves, the process I described is what we did. But if we just took a number straight from IRIS or from ATSTR and they had one significant digit, we left it at one significant digit.
And I think that's fine. I just, that was unclear to me what your practice was. So that would be a comment.
So we'll make a note to try to make that more clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
As we go forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for kicking us off, John Vandenberg. Other ATSAC members reflecting on the kind of high level process questions. John Boudreau?
Yeah, I'm a bit unclear on whether our primary charge is to look at the process and how these TRVs were developed, or to actually drill down and look one by one at the individual TRVs, because between new TRVs and changed TRVs, there's like 300 chemicals out there. So the chances that, you know, in this kind of time frame that I'm going to be able to take a look at everything is kind of unrealistic. And there's a couple pieces that will come later on. Excuse me while I scroll down here. For example, you could spend a lot of discussion time, I think, on, for example, carcinogenic PAH relative potency factors, because there's what Minnesota Department of Health has done. It's based on 2017 IRIS. Cal EPA also has its own relative potency factors for PAHs, some of which are relative to the benzoate unit risk, but some which are on their own. So, I mean, comparing the different systems for generating RPFs, that could be a lot of discussion. And the other one along those lines would be the new WHO PEFs for dioxins and furans. There is some very deep water in that proposal. I don't know how many folks out there are Bayesian statistics experts, but that topic alone could probably occupy multiple meetings. So where do you want us to go with this?
Well, because it sounds like there's two pieces, and team, love to hear, because John, I appreciate your overall piece, right? If you have, 300 or so new or changed TRVs, right? That's chemical by chemical, that's a lot of work. I think it was supposed to be a two-part conversation, right? Kind of trust in the overall process. As OHA DEQ kind of structured this in a way that makes sense and is defensible, right? And then I do think there's a desire to get into these very specific points of decision. But Holly, Dave, JR, others, Holly?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, John. I recognize this is a lot of information, and we really spent a lot of time thinking about how we could bring things to highlight to your attention for specific review, and do understand, maybe some of these individual questions we're asking require a lot more discussion and time, and we want to hear that from you as we get to those parts, and to give you enough time But really the overall charge, we wanted to first take a look at how you thought about the overall process and with the QC process, what you felt about it, all of the work that we did, get your feedback on that, and then bring your attention to specific questions related to specific TRVs. And we tried to do that by kind of bringing them up in these supplemental documents that we sent you, with a lot of the time we thought would be spent on document 4. Those ones where we were saying that DEQ and consultation with ATSAC would be the authoritative source. And we tried to put those into main themes and categories so that you could comment on overall process feedback for us. And then we could take that and apply them to specific TRVs if needed. So we tried to break it up, but definitely agree with you. A lot of these things, like you said, could be deep waters and a lot of discussion. So definitely let us know when we get to those, if it's not enough time, want more discussion on something. We'd really appreciate that.
And Holly, is that, and you all will forgive me for being such a layperson here, but so is that, like, John, I think you were talking like PAHs, like, is that like are there particular, like, diesel is kind of already separated? Is PAHs one of those places where you're like, this is a place where we need to have this conversation if we're going to be really giving you the right guidance, John?
Yeah, well, there's going to be pros and cons for each individual system for doing relative potencies for PAHs. So that's the kind of thing where I think that would merit, a discussion along those lines. And, it may very well be that what Minnesota's done is based on the most recent data, and that might work, but, without fleshing everything out, getting into a discussion of those differences, I think that would be helpful.
Right. And so I guess for, OHA DQ, right, is that one of the asks then of ATSAC members as you all continue to go through this, like, where are those places that you want to dive deeper, do that extra check, go in more cross-reference? Is that what I'm hearing? Or is that, yeah, Holly?
Yes, and I was just looking through the discussion questions, trying to figure out which one this is. And I feel like this is in document 4 is where we brought up. Is that right, Dave? Document 4, we brought up the issue of the PHs, and I think we have a specific question on it. So definitely we'll pause there and can really kind of dig deeper, and as we can take as much time as that is needed.
And I think even if we don't have a specific discussion question on it, I think that when we're in the document 4 zone is the right, we can make space for that conversation. I think we should have it and talk about in detail the things that you brought up, John.
Yeah, it looks like
So
discussion question number 6 under document 4. So I'm quickly looking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to echo, John, I hear you. There's a lot here. And I think you brought up exactly what we're hoping to discuss with you all. Like those things that you noticed that piqued your sort of alert bells on what's going to need to have a serious conversation. And I mean, to some degree, we want to have that discussion, and we want to get the feedback on what we might need to look at, what we might need to research more, and maybe even bring back to you all to talk about. So yeah, I think that's the kind of conversation that we're looking to have. So yeah, and I think here we're just trying to make sure that that the charge is to kind of think about, did we go about this the right way? Did we present information to you in the right way? Is this have we checked our authoritative sources in the right way? And then the ones that OHA and DEQ are kind of saying like, hey, we're going to be the authoritative sources here because one of these 3 others didn't have a value. Those are the ones that I think those deeper dives are going to be really important on. So, yep.
And am I also hearing that's the place if, because I think, John Bedrell, what I heard is with the amount of chemicals that are referenced, like going through each and every one, you have limited capacity to do so. So am I hearing like where you can focus, where OHA and DEQ has already said, here's where we need to focus? Is that where folks should really dedicate their limited time if that's where they can, Holly?
Yes, yeah, definitely the ones that we highlighted in the documents were to focus the limited time, and we were trying to strike a balance in the workbooks of, I think, we put it in there, but just of being receptive to the large amount of information that we collected, and then also heard from you all at earlier meetings. It would be nice to see. And so we wanted to provide all that information that we thought would be helpful if you had questions on specific ones. So I wanted to give that as kind of a supplemental feature, but wanted to really bring your attention to certain ones in the documents we wrote out.
Thanks, John Bedrell. John Stanek, Daisy, Susan. Yeah, Daisy.
Yeah, I think next, I think John bring out a very good point. I actually feel very good start. I really appreciate the amount of work you guys put in. I think it's a very, very good template to start. And what John's comment is, well, we as a member to contribute. I think that every information to me is there, but we just need some reorganization. And it's just how you organize, how you present the data better. So one, my overall feeling is like John said, it's kind of overwhelmed. There's so many chemicals. If I don't check each individual, I feel like, oh, I'm not doing the job. But if I check every chemical, the information there, to me, just, not very focused. So I have quite a bit of comments on the worksheet, workbook 2. So my thinking is I always like transparency. That's what I think you guys ask for. So when it's transparent, it's very easy to follow, what you guys do. So I had some very specific comments on the workbook 2. So when you actually organize in such a way, when we get to the question, so I think the ATSAC member can only, can be very focused. We don't need to look, every document in detail. So we know like what you want to do, what you rule there, and we can discuss it. Do we agree with your, approach? If a yes, and then we can just focus on one, workbook. That's workbook 2 to me. So if I focus on workbook 2, I click, I think every information is there. It just need arrange in such a way like everyone, can look and do calculation if they have any doubts, and then they follow, okay, this rule we discussed, and this we can, fast pass. But for some cases, there's ambiguity, not sure, we really follow this rule or that rule, then you call attention. And also, I like some of the information in workbook 1 to incorporate the workbook 2. So it kind of, I immediately, when I look through the case, I said, okay, this I need to see, like you suddenly have like a 1,000-fold increase. So but at this present format, like I need to go back forth. That's create a lot of like, how to say, charter, in a formal written, to me, if you give me, I think everything, I have to say, you guys did a fantastic job. Every information is there. I can find anything I want to find, all documents there. I just want to to simplify this review process. So I can, to me, I can just systematically just go through this workbook 2, and then I'm done with it. I know how you transcribe this information. So I have confidence because you already review all the value by external, QC partner. So I think it just everything is there. Overall, I think I follow through quite well. So I just need, I think when we go through the process, all the question or whether we agree or not will come up. So yeah, I actually think it's good.
That's great, Daisy. It sounds like when we get to that part of the conversation.
Yeah. Workbook 2, workbook 1, I have a very specific comment because we also in my agency, I just did the MN. We have an air monitoring network, but instead of focus on all this, environmental coming, we focus on pesticides. So we basically did the exactly same process, but instead of you guys, you like seek for, the other source. We have our own methodology. So we was just like, we use their point of departure, but we apply our own methodology. So it was, we go through like, 30, 40 chemicals. So I'm very clear the whole process, how to better present, to me, it's just, I needed to see the value. I needed to be able to calculate the value. So I have confidence. And then it's just in one worksheet, all you need to do. And in the future, so to me, it's like now my vision is that you have a one Word document and one Excel sheet. And if you do any rule change, you put in the Word document like every next 5 years, some other committee come in and you just make a change in the Word document. And then the Excel sheet was a template, the workbook is very, very good. And then you just need to update that. So, it's like you don't need to redo the whole process again, yeah. It's just update, then it make life much easier. I think you guys did a fantastic job, really.
Yeah, thanks, Daisy. So, I mean, but I think those kind of recommendations around how do you structure and design in such a way that allows for the user to more simply navigate it, but also I appreciate your just higher level comments around kind of.
Yeah. When we go to workbook, I give you very specific comments. Yeah, I don't want to now jump now.
Oh, I appreciate it. We'll look forward to
But
that.
overall, I said, it's, to me, all your question, I feel very good because that's what, our, as a, committee member, our contribution committee, we want this thing to become better. Yeah. But, to me, it's like you don't have anything missing that I need to ask you to dig more, everything's there. It's just, we need to rearrange, present in a more simple way. People, for reviewer, for public, whatever, whoever, in the future, maybe, after you guys retire, someone come in, they can follow your chain of thought, the process of how you go through it. So, yeah. And also, I think, maybe in the future, because you see, you have like 300, so many chemicals, right? Another way is like you can allocate, some chemical to each ATSAC committee member, because then it's kind of divided. So say if you assign me, I'm like in certain expert, area, I have a bunch of I have more focus on. So because I have more expertise, I can, really dig into, and the other I can just, browse through. And like John, his PhD, he took that. So that's why I say, each of us have some sort of a, emphasis. And then the rest, we can trust the other committee member pick up whatever. So that way, alleviate part of our burden. If I go through like 600 chemicals, I was like, oh, but if I get, 100, I'm okay. I can go through maybe, several hours. So. Yeah, maybe that's where, then, our expertise, get magnified, we work on the chemical we are familiar with. So.
Well, that makes sense. I imagine we'll hear that theme, y'all being drawn to the areas of expertise that you already have as a starting point and doing some of the double checking of calculations, et cetera. Holly, were you going to jump in?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say thank you, Daisy, for that. And we really do appreciate any suggestions you have for the future. As you heard, we'll be doing this again, and we're going to different committees after this, and we totally acknowledge how much information this is. And it was, a lot of thinking, how can we best split this up and organize it? And so open to any ideas you all have as we go through this process, and really appreciate just the brainstorming and feedback we get on that.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Thanks, Daisy. Susan?
Yeah, I don't want to reiterate what others have said, although I do really appreciate all the work that's gone into the information that you shared with us. So the links, the references, they were all very helpful. From my perspective, and maybe this changed as I went through, but I was approaching this as thinking really about reviewing it from a process level, thinking about it from that perspective. But then as you go through the questions and even through sections of the document, you realize that the questions get very specific about commenting on individual TRVs, or especially in areas where maybe there's not an overall process. And so there's not like a process to be evaluated. It's more about thinking about what was done for individual TRVs. And so some of that was difficult to get into, as John mentioned, just because of time and the fact that there are so many chemicals. Just in terms of being able to make comments on at that level. But in terms of, I also appreciate the fact that it seems like a lot of the comments so far from the committee, were really taken into consideration in the material that you shared, especially thinking about, providing all available like TRV values, for instance, so that, we could really sort of see the process laid out in terms of what information was available and then what was focused on. That was very helpful. Including other sources too, in terms of the information that was provided. I did have a couple questions. So, the information that came to us and the tables, especially those that are in document 4, everything is fairly well referenced with links in terms of where information comes from. But then when you go into the workbook and you look at, source, a lot of what's in workbook or in document 4 is just DEQs listed as the source. And I'm assuming that's because it is only list authoritative sources, and the authoritative source would then be DEQ in consultation with ATSAC. And so it loses that connection to where the information came from originally. I didn't know if there was, is all of the other information that we receive, is that publicly available, or how is that going to be connected back to the workbook so that you can really track, the actual original source?
So these are for ones, David, right? So that are.
Yeah, I can answer that. So for every TRV that is sourced to DEQ is part of the write-up in document 4. So anything that you would want to find about like where we started from on one of those DEQ as authoritative source TRVs, like you should be able to find a reference to it in document 4
Yes,
somewhere.
I could find it in document 4. I'm just thinking about moving forward in terms of like how things are going to live into the future. And, is the workbook the primary document that
I see.
individuals are going to go to for TRV values, and are they going to have the information that we have as a committee?
Yeah. So I think for right now, document 4 is presented as like an ATSAC document. And after we receive feedback from you all and go through kind of these committee processes, there will be some sort of, alongside the documents, there'll live some sort of a derivation document in some format like document 4, probably taking a lot of information out of there so that people that use the workbook can kind of see the derivation of these DEQ in consultation with ATSAC. That's kind of my current vision, but if anyone has any ideas, definitely open to hearing. This is the first time we're doing that, and we definitely want, this work we're doing for this DEQ authoritative source to be, presented alongside any workbook that we have.
Yeah, I would just hate to see all of that work get lost, as in, everything that you've put together that we have access to. If someone else is to go in and pull these values, they would lose that history and the original sources.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. We'll definitely make sure that those are somehow tied together.
I also had a question, as you get towards the end of the document, or the ends of, later questions, working with, draft or lower confidence values. What is the process going forward in terms of, is this considered, is there a cutoff for including information? Is it considered a living document? Will it continue to be updated as, new values are confirmed, or is that only going to be done back in consultation with ATSAC? And I just didn't know what the process for some of those draft values, lower confidence values might be.
Yeah, definitely. I have a few cutoff dates listed here. I can pull them up and read from them as well. And I think overall, would like to know what you all recommend too about the process. It was hard for us to get all of these materials ready for the rulemaking process and for meeting with you all in a way, because these values are changing. We have some that aren't final and are draft, like one of the later ATSAC documents talks about. So we had to have some sort of a cutoff date in order to kind of say, okay, these are the final numbers. We can write the documents and get things through these committees. And so we did do a cutoff date, and I'm looking for that date right here. So we incorporated all new updates to these inhalation TRVs from all authoritative sources as of August 8th of 2024. And so that included information that was not yet final. Then in early December, we checked the list of just the draft TRVs to see if any of them went final. And these dates are in ATSAC document 7. And so we kind of had to we thought we had to make kind of a cutoff to say that's where everything was when we made these workbooks and then these documents. But we acknowledge that things are going to be changing as we go through this rulemaking process. And so our thought was is that we'd continue to monitor new TRVs and updates to TRVs that come out, and that we'd evaluate them on a case-by-case basis throughout this process, and that we'd take a close look at these updates before that public comment period portion of the rulemaking. And we'd take a very close look at them. And even if there's ones we have questions on or anything pops up, we thought we could run them by you all as to kind of where we landed. But that is our general thinking as of right now, but would love to hear all of your thoughts as we go through this, especially when we get to document 7 on what you think we should do during this process. But it was hard to account for that. And so we kind of went with a cutoff date.
So a cutoff date for information you provided to us, but it sounds like it's open for updates to continue to be made into the future. That where that cutoff was made in August isn't going to, for instance, like decisions on those TRVs and those chemicals. As new information comes forward, you'll continue to be monitoring that and looking at that, considering updates.
Yeah, monitoring them and taking a close look at them, not just generally, I think, accepting them, but taking a close look at what updates have happened and then seeing if we can put them in through the public comment process. That's my current thought.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I guess I'm just thinking, what is that? Where does that show up? We'll when we get to document 7 and those that kind of haven't been finalized yet, we'll revisit that conversation. Is that the place for it then, Holly?
Yeah, I think that would be a great place.
These things that don't have kind of a final authoritative source or are connected to a cutoff of August 8th, 2024.
Yeah, but since we just talked about it too, if anyone has any thoughts right now and doesn't want to lose it, feel free to bring it up.
John Vanderberg's are on screen, so that's a sign.
You got my point there.
Yeah,
I actually agree very much. I kind of was concerned that right up front, the overview document would be better to say what the time frame is here.
Yeah.
Because I was concerned. I didn't see that until I got back to document 7. I thought that there's a sentence in there that should be brought forward right away, and perhaps reiterated in almost every document is the date of update or the date that it was closed, or the period. Because I was confused about that. I went back to make sure that when I was looking, for example, at some of the more recent IRIS assessments, you very nicely had brought in the most recent final documents, which is great. That's exactly what I was hoping for. But I couldn't really tell exactly what your process was, both to this point, but also moving forward. And Holly, you've kind of said it. It's just I didn't see that written down anywhere. Kind of if you'll have every 6 months, you'll have a review every year. You know, there's no sense of that at all here in terms of it, because it is a moving target. So it would be useful from the get-go, from the very beginning, to talk about the currency, if you will, how current this particular document set is. The documents don't actually have a date on them. So the overview document does not have a date on it, as an example. Right there, I go, well, I know when I got it that it was current as of that day, but the public at large wouldn't know that. So I think you should probably try to put a date stamp on pretty much everything throughout. I think just picking up on Susan's comment there.
That's a great suggestion, John. I'll definitely put that up front and make that more clear going forward when the cutoff dates were. So we were kind of grappling with that as we were writing these documents. So definitely we will do that. We did try to put a version date in the footer, and we'll definitely try to kind of keep those, since these are all public on the website, try to keep up the version date of these documents to be accurate, and then also add in the cutoff date of all the information we sourced. So we'll definitely work on that.
Very good.
Thanks. It did seem like there's another part of a comment, maybe a part around the kind of frequency of review, and maybe Susan, I could see your kind of living document. And I don't know if that's like a policy conversation, right, with OHA, DEQ reviewing every year, blah, blah, blah on this date, or maybe it's language that just says, you know, this is a, you know, OHA and DEQ intends to continue to monitor in kind of new and emerging kind of sources over time. So I'll leave that for the agency folks, because I don't know if you want to commit yourself from a policy perspective to review on a specific timeline, but maybe that's the other piece I'm hearing, is just being clear that there are things that haven't been finalized. You had to set a date at some point, you know, to have these conversations, but there could be changes in the future.
Yes, yeah. So the frequency of the overall review is specified in Oregon administrative rule, and that currently is a triennial review process. Given that this is the first time we've done this for this program, so this has taken a bit of time to go through this process and to do this for the first time. So we're doing a lot of brainstorming as we go through it, and your feedback will contribute to this brainstorming of how to make it more efficient in the future and how to streamline some processes and the frequency that we want. But it is in Oregon administrative rule right now.
Thank you, Daisy.
Yeah, I just want to you know, follow this one. So we also have a database in our, you know, department. So what we do, we just add, you can just add a column in workbook too. It's just a date. We actually build in some kind of program, you know, it can pump it up, like to update. If we like receive EPA or whatever, you know, you can just update. So it's just one column, like a update, you know, when, like I say, for those ongoing, right, you know, you update like, you know, last year, December, and then you see that one, you know, it's finalized. Then you just change the date. That's all you need to, and then you already know you're up to date. Yeah.
That's a great idea. Thanks, Daisy.
Thanks, Susan. So before we move on from these first three, John Stanek, wanted to just invite you in if you had any overall kind of process questions, these first three, any reflections? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be too redundant with what everyone else has said. Yeah, this is an immense amount of work, but I do appreciate, like somebody else has said, the organization for the review is, you know, it's really well laid out and clear. The separate documents have really helped me. I do appreciate the amount of work it takes to put together a database of reference values. We had a fracking project, I don't know, probably 8 years ago now, where we had 1,200 chemicals we had to find numbers for. And just to have another sort of well-built database available, I mean, we would have really appreciated it at the time. So we know, you know, just from experience, trying to build these things and find things that can be really problematic, especially from a risk assessor side. You know, and trying to make an attempt to fill in, you know, data gaps with numbers through various means, you know, I really appreciate, because that's, big uncertainty is not having a number sometimes, or at least something to think about or anchor, an assessment to. The majority, I think I'll probably have more specific comments as we move along, more or less related, like what are you going to do about data gaps and addressing uncertainty. And I think like somebody else has said about some of the transparency and just making sure you're clear on how, derivations were done. I think, especially with regards to the ones that DEQ is proposing.
Okay. Thanks, John. Any reflections, Holly, David? So I think you are teeing up the ones, particularly where DEQ is listed as the authority, John. I think you're previewing some of the questions that we will want you all to grapple with together. Thank you. Okay, well, let's move to the next. You want to introduce the next question, Holly? So again, this is connected to overall process, but getting more specific around document 1. I know some folks have already probably alluded to some of this, but Holly, do you want to?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to share the slide or just put the question in the chat.
We could quickly share this slide. Dana, if you could bring up slide 11, just get people going. I think this one might be related to some of the ones we just discussed. I don't think this one will take too long. But this question for all those listening in is, do you have any questions related to the overview of TRV review document 1? And this can be other than what you've already brought up that we already have notes for.
Thanks. So same process. We'll just kind of popcorn around to folks, and I know you probably mentioned some of these already in terms of the utilization and references and links, but yeah, specifically to document 1. John? Yeah,
I might as well go since I started before. I really only had one comment here, and that led me back to the proposed TRV for ATSAC. This is a document from, it might have been 2 years ago now, where the definitions of the chronic cancer TRV, chronic non-cancer TRV, and the acute non-cancer TRV are included there. I think it would be very useful to bring those definitions forward into these documents as well.
Yeah.
That actually leads to a separate comment or related comment, which is that in a sense, there is an assumption that the values pulled forward from the authoritative sources have the same definition. And I think that's an assumption that's probably valid, but it is an assumption that if you pull something from Cal EPA, you pull something from Texas, that their words, their interpretation of what their reference values are is the same. And I'm not sure that's exactly true. You're very clear about what your definition is, and you're equating these things that may not be exactly equated. So I just want to be try to be as clear as possible. And I think that belongs really in the overview document, right up front. This is what these terms mean. There is a list of acronyms in the document number 4, but again, the definitions are not there for the different authoritative sources that may be identical, they may be slightly different. And I know that a lot of work went into the definition of the RFC at the EPA. It has lots of words in there. And if you break it down, there's a lot buried in that definition. And your definition is much simpler, actually, much shorter and right to the point. It doesn't really talk about susceptible populations, for example, whereas the RFC does. And so I think it's important that you be as clear as possible in the overview document so that someone coming into this news sees right up front that definition and how you're using authoritative sources. That's my only real comment here. I already talked about the, I guess it was, let's see what else I wrote out here. Oh, the dates. I already talked about the dates. That's it for me.
Yeah, that's a great point, John. I'll definitely do that, bring those definitions to the forefront. I think we have some of them in document 4, but I think that's too buried. I agree with you. It should be right up front in document 1 moving forward.
Yeah, it could be kind of an attachment to document 1 because some of those definitions do get kind of lengthy. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Are you describing also, are there consequences of having those slight differences, John? Like maybe this is partly Ben curiosity, right? Because there's the, having those definitions clearly articulated and referenced in the document loud and clear. if there is slight variation, are there consequences?
I think what's important is that the state is defining what the state's definition is.
Okay.
And the state is choosing to equate that as consistent enough, because the state definition is actually, again, kind of simple. And that's in some ways a good thing. But again, I think it's, I don't know that there's any obvious problems. I just want to be clear about it. So
Yeah.
I see other committee have comments too. John Stanek, John Boudreau. The three Johns here all are got our hands up.
Ready to get in. I love it. And John Boudreau, I think you had come off mute first, and then John Stanek will come to you.
Okay, well, kind of echoing what John Vandenberg had to say, I agree with that. And I was just, personally surprised when I looked at the cancer TRVs and where they're using a specific risk level. Whereas, for example, if you go to the AWEA cancer health values, that they're all risk per 1 microgram per cubic meter. And it's not that, you're just expressing the same thing different ways, but the unwary out there might get surprised by that. If you've been used to dealing with a different definition for your cancer risk health value, that, you might get a surprise there. So I agree with bringing them forward and stating them often that this is how Oregon defines this is their particular definitions for everything.
Yeah,
so, and I'm not saying that you folks made a bad choice by any means, but just the fact that it's different, you want to highlight that difference.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. John Stanek?
Yeah, my comment on this document relates more to like maybe data gap sentence or two. I mean, I see what the number of chemicals they started with and how many. It would just be nice to see a blurb or the number of reference values that are missing, or for how many chemicals there isn't one. Just so it's there and it's highlighted. That's all I had.
Thanks, John. Daisy, were you gonna jump in?
Actually, I don't have anything for this one. I think it's perfectly clear to me.
Good. Okay, Susan?
I guess maybe a question that I had, and I think this is follow-up to some discussion we've had previously as a committee. So in the TRV selection and hierarchy, there's, and when the QC was done, the emphasis was on making sure that TRVs were correctly chosen from the most recent source. And I just didn't know what other, were other parameters considered in selecting the TRV source? Was it just the most recent value, or I didn't see a lot of, I know that all of the parameters are described in terms of, uncertainty, point of departure, but I didn't know if there was a process for determining that.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Susan. After we met with you all, I think it was meeting number 2, where we were looking at like the overall process put together. We had proposed to use publication date as the selection tool, like you said. And we heard from you all that it would be better to kind of look at different attributes of the TRV and look at the TRV kind of more holistically and a comprehensive look at everything that went into deriving that TRV to choose the best one for our program. And so we made a list of preferred TRV attributes for both chronic and acute, and put that list together, which now is in this document from a few years ago, which we can resend out and put in the chat. I can do that next. But just reading from it, so for example, like the chronic TRV selection, we made a list of preferred TRV attributes, which were, does it include a new critical study? Are there modern POD methods? Do they include uncertainty factors informed by new studies? Things like that. So we had a short bulleted list of those preferred attributes. And then when we were making our selection, we took a look at that list of preferred attributes as well as publication date to make a choice. So it wasn't just publication date when we made a selection, although often the most recent one was picked. So it really was a combination of all that after we heard your all feedback at one of the previous meetings. Does that help? And we can put that in the chat as well.
Yes, that does help. Thank you.
Okay, I'll find that document.
Awesome. Well, let's keep moving. If you want to, so we're going to move from another part of overall process, but really focusing in on the kind of third-party quality control. I don't know, Holly, do you want to introduce that question? Hopefully folks understand the background, but do you want to give any more context to the QC process?
Yes, so I can introduce this question. This refers to document 2. And so this one, looking at it right now, this one was written by our contractor ERG Eastern Research Group, who we contracted with to check all of the work that we did in our TRV tool. And so this memo was provided online on the ATSAC website. And our question here was, do you agree that the quality control process was adequate? And we'd like any feedback you have as you read through this memo, not just for this process, but also when we do this again in the future.
Awesome. Thanks. So with that as a prompt, thoughts on the work that ERG did? John Vandenberg, you're ready to start us off. I love it.
Can't help myself. I guess our first question is, this is a memo that was written and is done. So I'm trying to understand what the point of our commenting on it is. I do have comments about it, but it's not for them to revise the memo to clarify it here. Or what would happen if we've got comments where we suggest a change to this memo? Could you help me with that?
Yeah, so I think there's probably different categories of comments. One would be ones, if you saw a concern, we could go back and look at it and address on it and kind of brainstorm what we could do during this rulemaking. And then probably another step of brainstorming we would do would be how we could change the process in the future when we do this, and the importance of having kind of a different group check our work. Those comments are helpful. So I guess it kind of depends what the comments are, but we will try our best to think on it and address them.
So my reading of this was that the process was developed by DEQ and OHA that was presented to ERG. This is what it says here on the approach, on the overall process and the approach taken to develop the database. Then it was turned over to ERG to actually train their analysts to actually do a lot of the work. So I'm assuming that you gave some examples or something like that. But oftentimes now in kind of the concept of systematic review, you might have two people actually review materials to make sure that there is consistent eyes on what is being done. And as I read this, that second review would only occur if an error was identified that would impact the TRV derivation or was otherwise substantial. A second senior QC reviewer would confirm the findings. So to me, that means there was just one person that reviewed things, and their judgment as whether it was a substantial change or change in TRV derivation was the basis for a second reviewer. That's how I'm reading it, kind of straightforwardly here. So is that correct? Am I reading this correctly? There was just one reviewer that was responsible for a particular set of chemicals, and then a second reviewer had a second set of chemicals. There was no overlap of those two unless there was an error identified. Is that correct?
That's how I'm reading it as well, that they had one QC analyst and then could be elevated. Is that how you remember it, Dave? And that's how I'm reading the document as well.
Yeah. And I guess there was the additional step of like us, we were checking as we went as well. So
that's actually what I was interested in hearing. I don't see that there. There was another, it may have been spot checking here and there. But I
Yeah,
don't see
we
that
did.
the overall process was quality controlled by you guys, by the state people.
Right. We did. I mean, we reviewed as we went, but we didn't. I think what you're asking is if like a second person within the state like rechecked everything that someone else in the state had done
Well, there's spot
before.
check. Doesn't have to be everything, but just
Yeah, spot checks is probably accurate. I don't. There wasn't like a that. I mean, that's really why we went with the contractor, was to do that, like the full check of every value. So that part was, I think, only done by ERG.
so it occurred to me as I read through this, I thought, well, this is a document that was provided to you. You might consider if you should have the state create a document, and this is an attachment to that, that actually includes a little bit fuller picture as to what you did to design the QC process that then you gave to a contractor to actually do it. And that's what they're describing here. And then you could also include in such a, again, a state document, your review of that in terms of setting the stage and then coming through and spot checking. I'll call it spot checking for the moment. But I think that's another set of ways of assuring quality. I thought that the process that was described here was good. It seemed, I'm not questioning the process. I'm just questioning that it's not as complete as what I think you actually did. And so it would be, I think, appropriate for the state to have this document be, ATSAC 2 be a state document with an attachment being the memo, not that the contractor document is a state document, because it's not. It's just something given to you. I hope that's being clear. I'm
Yes.
struggling a little bit to describe what I'm trying to get at here, but that was what I struggled a little bit with.
Yeah.
Like, why am I reading a contractor report instead of reading a document from the state? And then I thought, oh, well, it looks like there's more that was actually done by the state as you just described. So that's my basic comment. I don't have any problems with what was done. It seems appropriate. I do wonder if, again, it was sort of elevation, if there was an identification of an important enough point that the analyst decided to do that. But how they decided that is a little bit unclear to me. As otherwise substantial, they said, but I don't know what that means really. So you might think about how to be a little more complete in describing your QC process. Because, again, that also would get into the issue that I raised earlier about rounding conventions. They're pulling numbers. Well, are they pulling it just as David, I think, as you said, as reported? That's fine. That should just be said there. Okay. That's a QC thing as well in my mind, is that the numbers pulled forward had fidelity to the original document. So
I appreciate what you're saying, and I think we can add more clarity to document this better. I would say that I do remember, like, we had recurring meetings with the contractor as they were going, and one of the criteria for like what's meant as substantial was if they found a discrepancy that would actually change the TRV value, that was substantial. Like if it was something like publication date was wrong or off by, that was like not substantial. But like substantial meant like the number would be different if this error weren't caught.
Yeah, and that makes good sense to me. So I think that, again, just my overall comment is, I think he would be better served if this was a state document with an attachment being the contractor report, and then you add a little bit up front as to how what the state role was in defining this and actually spot checking it as you did, whatever you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's helpful, John. And just to maybe bring it back to the question, because what I hear is some QI processes for the QC process. So, how do you do some quality improvement in the future? How do you better represent the process and structures that were utilized? Do you land at adequate, which I believe is the language in the slide? Because I do think it's a really important question that you all are saying, well, it's adequate in terms of the quality control as a starting point.
Yeah, I think with the additional information as we just heard here, I think the answer to me is yes, it is adequate. But I think the documentation could be clearer.
Yep, that's what I'm hearing. Thank you, John. Others on this question around the quality control memo, document 2. Yeah, John Boudreau.
Sorry, I've got an old sticky mouse. No, I agree with John Vandenberg's comments, and I thought in general the QC process was pretty good, and I don't really have anything additional to add to that.
Good, thank you. Susan?
I don't have any concerns about the QC process. Did have a question though, just as you know, I'm going through a lot of this is just a learning process about how things are being done. So there's a portion of the QC process that is on the confirmation of the hazard index designation. And is that just, you know, a confirmation of the designation, or is that an integral part of the TRV derivation? I just didn't see it come up elsewhere, anywhere actually.
Yes, thanks, Susan, for bringing that up. I was thinking about that too as I was rereading through this memo. And I think to John's point too, that would be helpful if we had kind of a state overview document where we could clarify that in addition to this. The hazard index process, we did have our contractor review some pieces of information that we were collecting for that process. And it is a separate process that relates to a regulatory program at DEQ, the Cleaner Air Oregon program. And there is policy where we have to go through and assign non-cancer TRVs, either a hazard index of 5 or 3, and different regulations apply to whether it's assigned a 5 or 3. And there's some complicated language around the hazard index, and we have a fact sheet that I think we put together for you all a few years ago, and we can put that in the chat that has an overview of it. But essentially, we have to go through and choose a hazard index of 3 or 5, whether it has developmental and or severe health effects. And we had a technical advisory committee a few years ago help us figure out what those criteria are. And some of those criteria are whether it has any mention of reproductive or developmental health effects, or it's on the Department of Transportation list. And so you'll see those are the words that ERG is using in that memo. They were double checking those things for us for this kind of separate assignment hazard index process. And so that's why it's in here in the memo, and we can give you all that fact sheet. And at this time, we're not asking for you all to review that. We didn't put those assignments in the workbook at this time. That will come up kind of later down in our rulemaking process, especially because we've already had a technical advisory committee just focused on this. So that's why it's popping up here. Hopefully that helps make sense of why it was mentioned, and we can put that fact sheet for you all in the chat to provide some more context. Does that help?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Okay.
It does.
Thanks, Susan. Daisy?
Yeah, so I actually think, you know, the review of the QC process is adequate, especially I assume, you know, you guys give them your worksheet and then they review, right? They review each of them. So it's at least two sets of eyes look through those values. I was more worried the other, like if you have a document, have someone else look at the QC and then you change, and then you get it back. So when you have this, then there's some other thing going on, right? You need to fix this, and then sometimes you introduce some kind of error we don't know. So I don't know, like I'm more worried, like if say I assume your workbook 2 is the one, like you mainly work on it, and then you transcribe the value to workbook 1. I don't know how you transcribe. A lot of times, if a formula or whatever, it's something will happen. So I don't know, like I think for like a initial value, from the source document to your workbook, that kind of QC is adequate. At least 2% more like independent. But when you're within, when we do a calculation, whatever, then within your own document, then you I assume your workbook 1 going to be public until wherever, and then the value in workbook 1 is truly, it's another, do you plan any QC for that one? So I was, it happens, I can see the process within your own, you get external QC, and then when you, from like Excel to Word or Excel to another Excel, file, something, especially, when you transcribe, something will happen, some value get lost, some significant. So there's maybe built-in QC to make sure whatever your publish value is same as your raw calculation. Yeah.
And we are gonna move into conversations about workbook 1 and 2, but it did sound like there was a question just around QC for those processes. Jared, were you gonna jump in?
Yeah, so just checking in with some of our staff who actually created them. It's a great point, Daisy. I think what they did was they used macros based on the same tables to create both workbooks. So I think the values themselves were not sort of any finger copy, cut, paste errors. That sort of gets rid of that to some degree, as long as the VBA code is pulling the right things. And I think there were checks involved there, ones and zeros we put in there. So for the most part, I think we feel confident with that. But it is a very good flag.
We did check for like row shift errors and things, like making sure that like the number of rows was right in both places, and the first and the last rows were the same in both places, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, maybe can, I just random pick some value and check it to worksheet. If it's quite, it's more like a sampling. So if you kind of have some confidence. Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did some spot checking of stuff, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, well, thank you. Any other comments on this last question? Otherwise, I'm gonna maybe move us into a break, and then we're gonna kind of shift gears and get into the workbooks. Anything, Holly, David, Chair, others that you want to name, or any of the other ATSAC folks, any final comments after our round robin?
Just that this was a great discussion. I think really thank you for the review and all the feedback. I think really helpful for us to hear all this. Thank you.
Thanks, JR. Okay. Let's see, it's what, 11:23? You want to come back at like 11:40? Does that work for folks? Give us
Yeah.
about a little over an hour or so for the next part of the conversation. Okay, so let's come back at 11:40 and we'll jump right into workbook questions. See you in 17. folks. 11:40. See, thank you, Daisy. Okay, you have a flash of your face or some indication that you're back. Thanks to the Johns. Okay, seems like we got folks making the way back in. So welcome back. Dana, if you want to pull up the slide 14, maybe. Oh yeah, we're moving into workbook questions. So this will be in reference to the links, workbook 1 and 2. We'll see how far we get through all of the discussion, but want to move into this kind of portion of our conversation today. So if you go to the next slide, we'll put the questions in the chat. So very similar to the previous conversation, looking for kind of some high level thoughts and then some specific questions around any issues with the workbook, functionalities, kind of future improvements that can be made, and just making sure that you all were able to interact with the workbooks in a way that's successful. So with all that as some grounding, throw the comments in chat. Holly, did you want to add anything in terms of the context?
No, that's all great. I could read through the questions just for everyone listening in as an attendee. So for these ones, these are all the questions related to the workbooks. Question number 1, did workbooks 1 and 2 capture the right information? Question 2, did you identify any systemic or thematic problems with either workbook that could be improved? 3, are there any missing functionalities in workbooks 1 or 2 that should work differently that we could improve for the next time we do TRV updates? And were you able to access all the information you needed to make decisions about whether to support DEQ's proposed TRVs? And we'll put those in the chat as well. And I know we've touched on maybe some of your answers to a few of these already, so we definitely have notes on those. And if you have a lot of specific comments that you don't want to bring up in the meeting today, we'll also gladly take any written comments or spreadsheets, copies that you have. We'll take feedback in any way, but would love to discuss these questions with you.
Daisy, you had referenced some of the workbooks earlier. Did you want to kick us off?
Sure. So actually, I think a workbook 2 is the main document, which give me all the informations. And I think a part of the chemicals like DEQ derived also put in the document 4. Am I correct on this, right? So your document 4, you have a extract out the chemicals derived by DEQ in document. But every chemical is in workbook 2, right? So, to me, my main concern here is the transparency. Because when I look at it here, your worksheet, I want to be able to know the POD, each step go to HEC, the uncertainty fact, and then the TRV. Doesn't matter what agency, what they did. So I want to the whole process is there. So at its current presentation, it's kind of difficult because your POD is not literally there. So I would suggest. So I actually have try to rearrange the column. So I would think you write the critical effect, the study critical effect, and then you just say the POD tab to move the POD part in front of the uncertainty fact, because it just follow your calculation. So we need the POD, and then the POD we need, I mean, information is there, no L, low L, whatever there. So POD, and then after POD, for the duration adjustment, I don't think that you need to, you can delete the 24 hours, because for your acute, you just say for 24 hours. And for chronic, you just say, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, right? So you can just put this information into, the sheet 1, define your acute and chronic. And then for the animal, from whatever animal, human, the exposure duration, you can put in the critical effect. say like, you list the critical factor, whatever effect, and then just in like a 13-week rest study. That's it. So and maybe parentheses for inhalation, say 6 hours per day, 5 days per week. Because sometimes they do 7 hours per day. Sometimes, they continuously 21 days. So you need to know this information to allow you to calculate the duration, extrapolation. So I think this information can put in the critical effect. So you don't need the, a specific column explain like, from 6 hours per day, 5 days per 24 hours per day, 7 days a week. And then this all information put in front of the uncertainty fact. Then the HEC, you said that you in your HEC column, you just say yes or no, adjust not. I think that you don't need to say yes or no. You just, put the value of the HEC there. It's just more straightforward. We see your process, you have a POD from whatever, source. And then you know that you are, DQ did not divide, you don't have like your own methodology. You are trying to adopt whoever they are. So, to me, it just lists what they put there. So it's by doing this, I think it's easy for outside to QC your value because they want to see where you copied the numbers from the source, material. And for us, as an ATSAC member, we can just like glance through POD, adjust, it's like the whole calculation is in there. So we actually can do, check all your calculations. If any mistake there, we can just, we know how to calculate this, right? So, and I think, let me see. So like for the cancer, the worksheet for the cancer, you list the column as a source TRV. Same, all I want is transparency. So I think you cannot say it's a source TRV. Your TRV, like John previously mentioned, is like a 1 in a million. A lot of people do 1 in 100,000, and some work is different. So I think you maybe better for you to include the slope effect, because that's the value actually you're coming from the source material. So maybe instead of say source TRV, you say source IU, inhalation unit, the slope effect there. Because then, to me, I always want to calculate. That's why I try to transparent. I wanted because for them to QC, they just need to check your slope effect is correct or not, anything wrong. But for us, if you want, we can very easily 1 in 1 million, divided by slope effect, see if you come up with your proposed TRV. So I think this way, it just all the raw value is there. It's good for others to check, because at the current, you just put there and I have to say, okay, what's the slope effect? So I get the slope effect from the source material and then I divide it. Okay, that's correct, like some kind of value. Let me see. Okay, and then the other things is, so the other thing I said, just like previously mentioned, I want the workbook 1 information. You said like the change, percent change compared to proposal prior to 2018, the value change in the workbook 2. So my purpose is like we have 1 central document, we can review it. So if you put the information in workbook 2, so I kind of, if I see a chemical and it jump like 1,000 times, so I kind of, okay, so let me pay attention to this one. Or you even can highlight what you want us to pay attention to, but I don't think we need to sort your workbook. I think alphabetically order is fine for me, at least for me. I don't know other members. For me, it's fine. So I want to leave the information in workbook 1 is in workbook 2, so I can see which one pay more attention. Why is 1,000 and if it's logical or your selection criteria is reasonable. Because when we just define a selection criteria, like you said, the recency. you know, like how recent they are, or how, you know, it's not that clear until you see a very specific case and you see, you know, the effect or whatever, you know, it comes, then you kind of have a judgment, and then you may need to go back to revise your criteria. And then another thing is I would like to, I would recommend you add some information like you now you put all the rule in separate documents, right? That's good, but I think you can think in the future each separate document is a section, so you can name it a section A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then in each section you have rules. So to me, if in your worksheet you have other individual column said. DQ pick this based on section A rule 2, like 8.2 something, you know? And then, you know, if we like the committee member all agree with all your rules, actually that one, we don't need to really, you know, check each individual because you already, you know, say it's based on rule 1 or rule 2. So I think that also, you know, in the future, you know, all your different documents can put in one more like a SOP. So in the future, DQ can just like, okay, now this year we change it, science change it, we need to change this rule. So we just change anything. Then you in Excel sheet, you already have this column, say, you know, based on one rule, and you made this selection. You can just search, you know, all these different, you know, this value was based on this rule, and now we change this rule. You can just update the, you know, all the value based on this rule. So I think this also for us, for you know, when we go look, okay, so you pick this, what's your rule? You know, what criteria? Then we go back to, okay, you use this rule. And if we think, you know, maybe not so good, so we suggest you to change. So I think I add this, you know, correlate to the rule, you know, and then you highlight the cases and you say like, you know, the rule is not really fitting, like, you know, a case like not really any rule can fit. And you can just like a flag this, you can, I think there's a function flag. You can flag those cases for ATSAC member to pay attention. And another thing, I have another very two specific comments is when you say that the DAF equals 1, you said the HEC, you said no. I think that's, to me, that's incorrect because it doesn't matter DAF as long as you use the symmetric adjustment fact, like RGDR equals 1, or, you know, systemic effect equals 1, doesn't matter. If you apply, if you like think your methods apply a DAF, that's adjustment of a human equivalent concentration. And because this affect your downstream, the interspecies effect. If you don't use DAF, then your interspecies effect is 10. But if you use DAF, it doesn't matter it's 1 or not, you will reduce the interspecies effect. You know, you normally a lot of people reduce the, completely take off the TK part. But OIHA, you know, they take like, they leave, you know, they don't take a whole thing. They still leave 2 something. So let me look at my comment. So this is one comment. The other is your POD. You said you use like a 1 hour. OIHA's OIHA's REF value something, right? I think that's also conceptually is not correct because POD is a point of departure. But if OIHA's you know, if they already adjust all the uncertainty factor, whatever, you know, I think it's better you still use their source POD instead of, you know, consider they 1 hour already final value. It's kind of, you know, in the future, someone come, oh, why this POD incorporate all the uncertainty factor? You know, it's kind of confusing. So I think I would, you know, at least for that one, I think it's document 4 something. I would rather keep a POD as a POD. And then you just take the source POD and apply whatever based on, you know, the authoritative agency you pick and do downstream calculation. Yeah, I think it's need, you know, the worksheet if you want, you know, after the meet, we can, I can later tell you how to move, how to simplify. Because that way that's me, I just have to follow calculation. Because if I just, just say now, we kind of go workbook 2, really, we can QC. We can't really review because when you click, there's no source POD there. So you can. And then for document 4, I think it's good. Document 4 is like, okay. But you see, document 4 and the workbook 2 is kind of repeat in a sense. So that's why I always, try if you give us like one central document, everything's clean, organized, we look through as long as, okay, we only focus on workbook 2 is correct, then we don't need to do anything else. And we review your rules and we agree with your rules and you already put the rules in the workbook 2. So you pick this based on rule. You can based on several rules, you can just put there. That's what we did. We if we pick some card, we say the rule, 2, 4, and then you even can put a link to there. So if a reviewer said, okay, I don't know, I'm not sure why they picked this, and you click, the rule is there, so they review. So that way, it seems at least simplify our way of looking all the documents. And in the future, for future ATSAC members, they only have 2 documents. One, it's more like a SOP. You can divide this for easy, some in PDF, but you also can put it in one single document, you lay out the whole summary paragraph, then section A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then just each section, you put some kind of A1, A rule, A1, A2, priority, and then link this back to the Excel. So in the future, they only need 2 documents. The SOP, do I agree with your selection of all these rules? The worksheet, are you update the source file material? That's why I say, you can put the update, say what date, you can put the column, say based on what rule, and then you have all this, to me, if I click your source file and I see, okay, that's correct. Your POD is this POD. And then your selection criteria, I click, okay, this rule, I agree, this rule, then. So I think it's more transparent. So I don't need to dig into, to find, okay, now where the POD and look at your document 4 and find your POD. And then, it's, so, yeah, that's why I think the Excel sheet can be, just need to rearrange and add, maybe I think in your, original workbook, maybe you'll have all the information there. Because I assume you have to calculate it based on, all this information. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I have for, now I actually, go through the document for individual chemical, but like you said, it takes a long time, so I haven't done it, but I did each chemical, see what I can, make some sense. But in the future, I think if you rearrange your workbook and you actually don't need, people to review anything, you just have a one single workbook and one single Word document. And you don't need to write a lot of things because it's all the rules are, connected. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that's all I have for now.
Yeah, thanks, Daisy. Holly, did you want to say something?
I just want to acknowledge, thank you so much, Daisy, for that thoughtful feedback and thinking through how we could restructure it. My wheels are turning right now on what we could get it to look like in the future, and that's very helpful. It's a lot of information, and I really like a lot of your ideas that you just mentioned. So we'll definitely be thinking about those and writing all that down. Is there anything else?
If you want, we
Yeah.
can afterwards,
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, it's to me, I said transparency. That's why I think you
Yes.
guys ask for, transparency is just, I want to see the value. And if you can catch up, if any error, you can just immediately, catch them. If everything is on the book, yeah.
And
Yeah,
Daisy, if you made changes in the copy that you have, that would be awesome if you could send us your copy so we can see how.
Yeah, I can do
How
some
that
change based on your workbook too. Yeah, I can add those and highlight, And yeah, just remind, there's a one, typo in the workbook one.
Oh, yeah.
You said that the last, the first sheet, there's like acute, you say chronic. I think just need some
Oh,
correction. Yeah,
okay. Thank you.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Daisy. And then I guess the only other thing, and correct me if I heard this differently, like for Holly, David, what I think I was hearing, Daisy, is also just an articulation of kind of the underlying rules that you're using to kind of get to if this, then that type decisions. And is that something that exists already? And maybe I heard it differently than you were describing, but David?
Yeah, I think we have the beginnings of it for sure. Like we condense. I think we did condense a lot of our reasons for why we selected one TRV over the other, and that's in workbook 1 in that reason for change column, like the very short version of it. So
Yeah.
it might just be like an expansion of that information to be more detailed, and then
And
it
then
would just
showing
be,
up in workbook, it's kind of like in that one-stop shop that you're describing, Daisy. It's like having it all in one place, so it all connects. It makes sense.
I think just to, in case someone, the Excel sheet, how to review, because to me, I normally just hide all the non-relevant information first. So I only look at to those like very relevant. So you can expand or, make it your Excel worksheet shorter to review the information. So I say, so to me, I think everything information. See, you have to me, idea, I suggest you guys have just a master workbook. And then for external, if you can just hide some column you don't think is important, just hide it. And then if someone asks you, can just, you hide it and set up a password for people not be able to work on it. Unless you have the password, you can unlock and work. It's just like only certain people has the access. So you get the code. So especially for those calculation sheet, you don't want people mess around. You can just protect the sheet. You hide the column. Like say some information you say, in your cell, you already break it into like a cancer, chronic, non-cancer, acute. You don't need the information acute, chronic, so you can just hide those non-relevant, but you won't be there, you don't need to delete it, you just hide it. And then they just show the people like, so for me, like, maybe I don't want to see the cast number, but I want to see the chemical name. So I want to see, what, I don't want to see yes or no. Then, it's just kind of, you can, from you guys, like you can just hide whatever you want and show us what you think it's important for us to see. And then if we come and, you unhide them and then can make your change or whatever. So to me, it's like a master workbook, and that's all you base on. Any change, you have some designated person to do the change, like QC, each change QC, then, make sure this master workbook is accurate. And then from there, you can, output any kind of thing you want. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Daisy. And David, I think you're asked, like, if you've already made some of those edits for your own kind of navigation, Daisy, it'd be helpful to share that with the OHA team and DQ teams. And then certainly there might be some additional follow-up just around how to structure this in a way that allows folks to move through it more easily.
Yeah, I sent you my, like a comment, specific comments saying you understand some, I maybe make a couple examples of what, maybe listen through the other committee members, then, you can have some idea. See, to me, I think the workbook too can be make it much clearer. That's from my perspective, but I'm not sure, the other may be perfect fine, so.
Well, that's a good pivot. So let's open it up to other folks. You might have some new ideas or some validating ideas based on what you just heard from Daisy, but for other ATSAC folks, really getting to these key questions to capture the right information, whether they're thematic or systemic problems, et cetera. John Vandenberg, jump in.
So I have pretty limited questions here. I did look through them, did a lot of spot checking, and I must say I'm very impressed by the information that's there. This is a tremendous amount of work, and it's a great resource. So what I thought was it would be useful to have workbooks 1 and 2. And I'm sorry, before I say that, I did focus mostly on the cancer links here because I tend to find those as the most prominent in terms of driving regulatory requirements. So what would be useful, and I think this came up earlier, is to add a date stamp to each row, just so we know what date it was evaluated in case there are updates. So it's very straightforward. I also think it would be useful to include the inhalation unit risk value that was used. This goes along the lines of kind of what Daisy was saying, a little bit more information, PODs, but also the IUR for the cancer would be very straightforward to add that. And that was then, of course, used as the basis for the calculation of the 1 in a million risk. The third thing that is not going to be hard to do, but I think it's important to probably state it someplace, and it may not be in the workbook itself, but in the reference to the workbook, is for many of these carcinogens, in fact, the vast majority of them, I would say, the age-dependent adjustment factors that are oftentimes used now were not included and not applied. That yields about a 60% increase in lifetime risk to look at the age factor there. So the more recent ones from 2006, maybe, well, 2005 was when the guidelines came out. But from around that time until now, the age-dependent adjustment factors have been applied in the IRIS program. And I do believe that in some cases, California, and maybe John or others can speak to this, have applied a factor as well for early life exposure. And so I think that it would be useful to flag those. And it could be just a yes/no kind of column that could be added as to whether that was added. And along those lines, I'm assuming that as the state moves forward, you're not proactively adding age-dependent adjustment factors to the older carcinogen assessments. And you can clarify if that's correct or not.
Yeah, that's right. We apply the early life adjustment factor when to those that have a mutagenic mode of action, including formaldehyde from the most recent IRIS assessment. And we don't do it to all carcinogens, only those that have that mutagenic mode of action. And I definitely think we could do. We do mention for those in like that comment, like that almost furthest right column in the workbook 2, whether or not they are mutagenic. But I think we could make that clearer and more consistent in how we mark it, so that it's very clear, like these ones are mutagenic mode of action. And the way that we apply that is when we convert from the TRV to the RBC, the risk-based concentration. So when we make that adjustment, so that when we're applying it to the residential RBC, for example, then we apply the early life adjustment factor to that TRV to make that adjustment.
So I think that what you just said, that I don't think that's stated in any of the documents that I've seen. I don't recall seeing that. But maybe
right. I think it's not. I think it's the RBC component we've been saving for the rules advisory committee. So because we have other adjustments as well, multi-pathway adjustment factors, and that will also be applied. So and I can see a value in also adding flags for that, like for any TRV where we would apply some adjustment to the RBC, we would have that flagged here in these workbooks. I think that's easily doable as well. And
easy to flag in the workbook, but it has to be accompanied by some text somewhere that defines what you did and under what conditions. And the fact is that many of the earlier carcinogens likely had a mutagenic mode of action, but that has not been applied retrospectively to those. So, that again, it's a very straightforward comment. The other comment I would make, and I'm not sure where else to put it or when to put it, would be, I think that moving the workbooks into an online system where an individual could put in a name and pop up what they're interested in, because for the public at large, they may not find this to be nothing other than overwhelming, whereas they may have certain chemicals they're interested in. But I like having this big spreadsheet because I like to scan through things and see a lot of different chemicals I'm interested in. So I think that you don't want to lose this as a resource for the public and anybody interested in it. But I think that you could move to have a really dynamic system that allows the linkage between these workbooks and has a fairly friendly front piece to it. get into it. But that may be something for you to consider down the road when you've got lots of resources to do web design. So that's my other comments. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. John Boudreaux?
Yeah, I would agree with Daisy as far as the idea of adding a column with the POD to the non-cancer tabs on the workbooks. And also for the cancer tabs, inhalation unit risk and or a slope factor. I hate to make the workbooks too engaging, but sometimes it's good to have both. So, and as far as the early life adjustments for cancer risk, California's kind of doing what you folks are doing. They're not applying that on the risk assessment side, they're applying that to the risk management side. So it would go into the, like, for example, for the hotspots program, it's in the guidance manual. So it goes in, like Oregon, it goes in along with multi-pathway and such. So it saves you from having to go back and readjust all the old unit risks, but you still get to make use of it. Although, of course, everybody does things their own way. California also doesn't apply the age adjustment factors to genotoxic carcinogens. It just said we don't want to get into the fight of trying to determine exactly what the mode of action is, and just wound up applying them to all carcinogens. But that's, everybody makes their own choice.
Is that a choice that's being made here?
Yeah, we have that. Yeah, in Oregon, we've been applying it only to those mutagenic genotoxic tax, and EPA does that, does it that way too. Yeah, John's right. That's sort of like a policy decision. I think it's most important for sure for the mutagenic carcinogens.
Anything else, John Boudreaux?
Nothing else.
Awesome, thank you. John Stanek or Susan, thoughts on the workbook questions? Yeah, Susan?
I really don't have any additional comments to what's already been said. I do appreciate all the work that went into it. Was able to navigate it. Feel like every time I go in, I learn something new, or I'll make a comment that I feel like something's missing, and then I'll go back in and realize that it was there. So I do appreciate how much information is consolidated, and anything that can be done to move information that may only be like in document 4, or as others had said, thinking about PODs or other factors that are used for calculations that can go into it, just so that everything's in one location, certainly that can be helpful.
Susan, and was there any, I think your last comment was probably what related. So when you said that, there was times you thought something was missing and then you realized it was there, is that really around the structure and design, or like, were there examples?
It's about the structure. I think it's just, learning how to use it, and, as a user, and realizing how much information is embedded, and just, discovering it as you're going through. Because for the most part, I wasn't trying to go through these workbooks, start to finish. I was really just using them as references, to maybe spot check an example, or to try to understand an example in document 4, and then I would go back to the workbook and see how it was laid out. So that was how I was using it.
That's great. Thank you. John Stanek, any thoughts on the workbook questions?
Yeah, admittedly, I'm a little bit behind on like really going through the workbooks. I was more focused on how it related to, I think, section 4. But I do like Daisy's idea of some reorganization here, just kind of giving it a quick look on structuring how you might walk through how something's derived. I think I have some comments. It's probably more on the language used in the actual document regard. I think there's a little bit of conflation or confusion between DAF language and HECs, and whether or not a default of 1 is used and not calling that like an HEC per se. I'd probably just need a little more time to really flesh that thought out, though. But otherwise, I don't have any really outstanding comments right now.
Thanks. So Holly, David, I don't know if there's anything. Oh, Daisy, jump back in.
Yeah, I forgot, but also see the workbook. There's a species animal. I think it's better just specify what species it is. So you have some place clearly you see it's a mice or rat because you describe in the the POD discrimination, and then your species say animal. So you can just more like mice, rat, rabbit. The reason is like I said, EPA has some calculation error in rabbit. So if there's a rabbit, maybe we can go back and look at the inhalation rate, calculation is use the wrong one or use the correct one.
Awesome. Thank you, Daisy. John Vandenberg.
So Daisy's comment there just raises a question for me, is that to go back and through and identify what animal species it was can be a pretty significant effort. It means going back into all those documents again. And so I just wonder if these comments need to be balanced against keeping things moving forward, because this was a huge effort to get to this point. So I guess I'd like to hear from the state folks as to whether, as you consider the comments, some of them I think are going to be, very straightforward, and other ones are going to be actually quite a big lift for you. So do you have a sense of that from what you're hearing here?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, question, John Vandenberg. Yes. Holly.
I was thinking about this during the break, actually, when we had a pause. I was thinking what I should do. It was before we got into the workbook section here, but I think what I'll do for myself at first is to kind of put these into categories of, this is what we need to do, get through this rulemaking and to like get the science put into our rules, and then this is what we need to do next time. And so I think all of this stuff is super helpful, since this was our first time going through this and had so much info. So I think that'll be part of summarizing our feedback that we get through this series of meetings, or putting them into those buckets. And we value all of what we're hearing, but I think we'll probably start to kind of separate these into what can we do now and what should we do next time.
I think that's actually very useful, because I don't think that any of us want to have you take another year to do the next round of this now, but in fact, as you move to the future. And so the question is, what you have now, is that adequate to use in the program to move forward? And my own view is it is, but I don't know if others would agree to that. So, but I do hear, this is an issue with review committees, is they always want more usually. So just put that on the table for you. Okay.
Yeah, I sorry, I just chime in. I think some easy to do, because you just need to move rearrange the column. Some, that's why I say originally I'm not sure your raw workbook, but some, like John said, maybe you don't want to like take another, then that's completely out of this purpose. The purpose is try to move smoothly. You can finish it in due time. Get whoever wants the value is there. Yeah. But some, I think it's a very easy to do. Just rearrange the document and it's more clear. Yeah.
Well, maybe for Holly, David, I mean, that for this group, I appreciate Holly, you naming kind of what's the now stuff versus what are we learning from this process that can be incorporated into the future. And then I guess you used the word adequate earlier, John Vandenberg, I think you just said it as well. Is that the filter through which ATSAC really should be trying to get to? Is right? Ultimately, all of this work is going to inform what ultimately is a separate rulemaking process, but is that the filter? Like, is this adequate to kind of be enough to inform the future conversations, or like, how should they be filtering through? Or Holly, how are you filtering through, kind of thinking about the now versus the future? What are the things that this group needs to have in order to have enough kind of rigor and confidence going into the future discussions? Does that make sense how I'm asking the question? I just want to make sure like folks are all good with saying like, yes, there's improvements that could be made. We could design this different, those type of things. But John Vandenberg, to your point, right, if it's going back through every single study to try to really capture the type of species that was analyzed, is that necessary to have enough rigor to be able to move forward? Or is it kind of adequate as is?
My own view, if I jump in here, Holly, before you do it, David, is that it is adequate for moving the program forward and for actually applying it. But you will always find, particularly when you go to public comments, you're likely to get comments along these lines. Is, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to correct this, you need to correct. And that oftentimes leads to a significant delay that actually doesn't help move the program forward or provide protection of public health. So I just think that it's appropriate to say, and I'm saying right up front, I think what you've got now is adequate to move forward. I think that there's going to be some improvements, and some of them are very straightforward, some are not, and I think that's my view of it.
That's helpful. Thank you for reiterating. Holly, David, any reflections? Because I know we do have at least a start of another conversation that we can begin today. Holly?
No, I think that's all very helpful, and I really appreciate that. And I think we talk about, when we hear your comments too, it's helpful when you put things in terms of what we could do in the future versus, is this enough for you to make a conclusion now for this rulemaking to move it forward? So hearing both of those kind of categories of comments are really helpful.
Thanks. Well, I think especially going into this next part of the discussion where DEQ is the authoritative source, and ensuring that ATSAC and you all, as we have these conversations, you feel like some level of confidence together through the frame that we just discussed. Okay. Any other final thoughts on this portion? Otherwise, Holly, maybe I'll have you introduce kind of how I imagine this is going to be part one. And we'll continue this conversation tomorrow when we come together. But any other final comments, ATSAC folks, or reflections, OHA, DEQ? Okay. Well, Dana, if we could pull the slides back up. And again, we're going to move into kind of document 4, the TRVs, where DEQ is the authoritative source. And then you'll see, as Holly alluded to previously, that it's kind of one question per slide in this section that's been kind of identified. So you're not going to have the kind of group questions for this part of our discussion. It's really going to start diving in more specifically. So Holly, why don't I pass it to you to introduce at least the first question that we'll get through today, and we'll see if we can get to 2.
Yeah, exactly. We'll spend as long as we need on each one of these questions, and this is where they start to get a little bit more specific, our questions, and a little bit more kind of not so much about process, but we start to drill in a little deeper on some of these questions. So I pulled up document 4. This is a lengthy one. But this first question on the next slide, I will read it. This question, number 1 for document 4, is what feedback or concerns do you have about the way DEQ proposes to adjust acute TRVs for exposure time in many cases? And so this question is really getting at section 2 of document 4. And this section was all about acute TRVs derived from other sources, where we modified the exposure time. And this started off with a background section, and then we got off into listing the different ones where we modified acute TRVs. So we can open it up there and stop sharing the slides. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay. Wants to lead us off on exposure time. Yeah, Daisy?
So are we start commenting on document 4?
Yeah, so it's really looking particularly section 2 for the first question around the adjustment.
I do have a question about this acute TRV.
Yeah.
You said that you use or you have the 1 hour, the 1 hour value as your basis. I saw that or you also have 8 hour. You know, why you're not using the 8 hour instead of using the 1 hour?
Well, so our 24-hour, ours is 24 hours is the.
Yeah, I know, but you sometimes a lot of people don't have like 24 hours, so you need to do duration adjustment, right? But I saw that your method said that you adopt or you have 1 hour REL, the POD, and then you derive your acute. So my question is, you know, or you also have 8 hour. I think some they have 8 hour REL. So why not use 8 hour? It seems more closer to 24 hour.
I might let John Boudreau take this, but my understanding is that the 8-hour REL from OEHA is more of like it's more of a chronic value than an acute number. It's like for a worker scenario where you're exposed for 8 hours, but like 8 hours every day. Like is that accurate, John?
That would be accurate. It's essentially a special case of the chronic REL, and ARB asked for it to be able to protect off-site workers. So who, like as you said, they would be exposed for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, but that's a different application than the acute REL.
But Daisy, how does that relate to what you were commenting on?
I think okay, that I think as long as kind of justify. So I was like not very clear on that. So another thing is like I look at the table 1, right? So I will make some suggestion. So there's some kind of inconsistent here to me. Just my opinion. So I would like the POD to a lot of study the animal study they use volumetric unit ppb ppm, but when we derive your acute TRV we are in concentration microgram per cubic meter. So I would suggest like to at least to me POD at the POD level convert into the microgram per cubic meter. At least in your table 1. So my reason is like, then I'm very clear the human TRV compared to animal kind of POD. So have a sense of the magnitude. That's just my opinion. Of course you can do both. So you can at the end convert it. But to me, maybe better. You don't have to do. Just to me, it's easy at the front. POD equals no L equals like 80 ppm, then equals immediate converted. Second is the unit conversion. Same here. I just can't look at the value. I like you to like a unit conversion equals the molecular weight divided by 24.45, and then equals whatever. So it's like because by doing this, you're very clear, where the unit conversion calculated. See, but at the current format, it's like, I don't know if the value is correct. No, it's hard to check. But if you, put in the molecular weight there, so you just, equals molecular weight and specific value indicated. So immediately it's easy, if something wrong with it. Do we need to go through each individual chemical, or we can just,
I mean, I'll look to the team. My suspicion is you wouldn't have to go through each. You mean in this conversation, Daisy? I don't know that I mean, I guess if you saw issues with a specific chemical and the.
I haven't finished all the but what I did, I whatever I cross, like I say, bromine methane, I actually look at it. You kind of use the. I think that the Hobbes law, the N value, I try to find the source material because the one said N equals 1.33. But really, unless you see the study, I think it's kind of hard to use this one. The reason why, because the empirical n value, Hopper's law, the n value is truly, you can only use it in the tested time window. Say if they never go to 24, you actually cannot extrapolate beyond your empirical data derived range. So my thinking is like in this case, maybe in your rule, you should say, if you cannot sure, it's better to default to 1. It's just more conservative. To me, unless if I see, okay, they have value to up to 24 hours, then of course go ahead. It's, logic, it's better than default. But, I just reviewed the bromethine, this case. I feel like I couldn't find out that the source, the original study where they derived the 1.33. So I think I have some, specific comments on that one. Yeah, and some others, let me see.
Thank you.
Oh, the other one I mentioned, you said the POD equals O E as 1 over REL. So POD just POD. POD is not REL. So I would, rather you do, the DF, UF all here. It just kind of no, because in the future, if you put in the worksheet, the people confused, I don't know, some other community can comment on this one. That's all. So yeah, I maybe send you more specific comments when I finish all the list, but that's what basically, what I have so far.
Right.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful, especially the comment on bromomethane. I got that. And if you have any other comments, yeah, please send them as you get them.
Thanks, Daisy. So other feedback on the proposed acute TRV sections?
I don't have a lot of comments here. I thought it was well described. One thing that I didn't see there, and John Stanek can speak to this much better than me, is that he wrote a document about acute risk assessment methods probably 10 years ago. And it would be good to include that in the reference list here as sort of a foundational document for how this has been done in various assessments. And my second comment is that I've always found it troubling to talk about Haber's law when we in fact know it's not a law because it's wrong sometimes. And the factor should be a power function on the concentration, which tends to drive the risks. So with acute assessments in particular, I think the Ten-Berg adjustment, as you refer to in the documentation, is quite appropriate to use. So you might want to just put Haber's law in quotes. That's what it's called, but it's not really a law because laws are not supposed to be broken, supposedly. So just a side of comment there. That's it for me at this point.
We do have a question on that. I mean, John, you might have saw the preview here around, or any thoughts around where Haber's law should not be applied to specific air contaminants. So is that a filter you've already had time to think through? When you think about kind of
not generically, no, not generically, but it's the longer the time is, I think the more applicable it is. But it's when you get the really short times, the really high concentrations, that it breaks down, and then it becomes a power function. The concentration drives the risk. So it's kind of, I can't speak generically to it better than John Stanek certainly could.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm pointing at you, Don. So.
John, do you feel on that point? So I don't know, John Stanek, if you have any reflections on Susan. I saw you had come off, so we'll come back to you. But John Stanek, anything coming up?
I'm not particularly well versed in duration adjustments like some other colleagues of mine, but I think, John, were you referring to the OECD document? I couldn't catch what reference you were.
I thought there was a document that you and I don't know if it was Gary or others wrote that was about 10 years ago about a comparison of acute assessments for a set of chemicals. Am I recalling that correctly?
Well, there was not I wasn't on that one particular, but there was one that I sat with George on. It was an OECD work group where they put together an acute guideline, which talked a lot about duration adjustments.
Okay, maybe that's
with
what.
some case studies.
Right. Case
Yeah,
example.
that would be. Yeah, I don't see anything standing out that's really different from what's here, but it might be a good added resource as a double check, because that was vetted. I mean, that was some industry folks as well as international people on trying to help that. It essentially was our attempt to do acutes a long time ago, and that's what it kind of evolved into.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can track that.
Yeah, I was going to say if you have the reference source, that'll be helpful. Susan, you were going to jump in earlier.
I also not well versed in the time adjustments, but had a question. So just in going through, the background on the types of extrapolations where Haber's law with this adjustment can be applied. It discusses extrapolating from shorter exposure times to a longer one, and then longer ones, longer exposure durations to a shorter one. And so I guess I was expecting in maybe in the situation of table 2, that may have been applied there, but a different calculation was used, and I guess I just wanted to ask, is there a time when that scenario that was described for extrapolation from the longer exposure to the shorter with an exponent of 3, when that's applied versus what's presented in table 2, or is this just because it's specifically subchronic to 24-hour acute adjustment, where you just adjust for the days per week?
Yeah, so everything in table 1 was a situation where the experimental study was looking at like something shorter than 24 hours, and we were extrapolating out to 24. I think it could be like we maybe could have labeled this more clearly. Like, so everything in table 2 is coming from a situation where there was so ATSCR's intermediate MRLs are usually applied to longer periods of time, like up to a year, actually. Like, so the studies are usually like weeks or months. And so so the only adjustment I made in these cases was to take out that days per week component. So in the studies, say they treated mice for 6 hours a day for 5 days a week, so the grad students could go home on the weekend. And and so the hourly adjustment from like the 6 hours a day to 24 hours a day makes sense still, because our time is a 24-hour time, but because we apply it to like a single 24-hour period, like that extra adjustment from like filling in the weekends didn't make sense. So it is still applying Haber's law, but or principle, I guess, as John Vandenberg said. It's trying to think how to explain it better.
I mean, I think I understand. Like I said, reading through, I was expecting it, the way it was presented, to be set up in a certain way. And so then there just aren't examples in this case of extrapolating from a longer time period that are not in 24-hour periods, I guess, to the shorter time period. So they're just not presented in the tables.
There was one case where we did apply that, and it was to hydrazine, but that's not in these tables. It's that there were other adjustments made also. So I think that's in the table 5. Yeah, table 5 on page 24 of document 4. That was a case where we did actually use exponent n equals 3 because that was going from like it was a continuous exposure for a pretty long time, like shrinking it way down to a 24-hour. And so, yeah, so we did use that more familiar Tenberg adjusted Haber's law equation in that case.
Okay.
Anything else, Susan? No? Okay. John Boudreau?
Yeah, I had a specific question on one of the longer duration to short duration for the acute. I suspect I know what the answer is going to be to this, but I just got to play the devil's advocate and mention it. For chromium-3 water-soluble compounds, TRV got based on the ATSDR intermediate MRL. And I noticed that you used the AWIA has recent RELs for both acute and chronic, and you used essentially the AWIA chronic RELs, but for the acute, you used ATSDR's intermediate MRL instead of the AWIA acute REL. And my question was, why?
David, you're off mute, so.
Yeah, good question. I'm in the workbook 2 right now. Oh, let's see. OEHA has acute. OEHA does have an acute REL for water soluble Chrome 3.
Chrome 3 water soluble.
Soluble. Oh yeah, okay, there we go. I was up a row too high. Let's see. Well, the ATSR one, let me see if I'll scroll over to the reasons column. This is good toxicology on the spot. Let's see.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one, if you want to take a look at it and put it off till tomorrow, that'd be fine too.
We should probably do that. Like I want to like read this and make
look at it.
sure I'm up. You know, like this took long enough to put together that by the time we got to the end, it was hard to remember the beginning. But
Yeah, we'll look at it.
yeah, we'll look at it and be ready to. I'll be ready to talk about it tomorrow.
Awesome.
That's okay.
That's good.
John Stanek, I see you posted the link to the previously referenced report, so thank you. Just making sure team you all see that in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. So on this first question, any other pieces around kind of the exposure time? So I'm wondering, team, I know we had a little bit of conversations just around applying Haber's law broadly, but I'm looking at 1244, and I don't know if we should jump into another part of the conversation. Maybe we can preview. I guess folks will know the questions, but tomorrow we have a number of questions moving through document 4. And in theory, document 5, but that might be a big lift to get through both. I don't know, team, what do you think? Do we want to start a conversation? Do we want
I have a couple wrap-up slides just to remind everyone with where we're at. And this was a good start to question number 1 of document 4. I think at our next meeting tomorrow, we can get through more of these really important questions for document 4. So make sure you have that document ready for tomorrow and think through some of those questions and hopefully have good discussion on those. So I think we can move back to kind of the wrap up slides and everyone will kind of know where we're going to pick up tomorrow.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. I forget the numbers. Dana, do you have those?
Which one did you want me to start sharing on?
Like the,
Maybe slide 34.
yeah, thanks.
Sure, one moment.
Thank you, Dana. Awesome. So we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So just as to kind of zoom out for a minute as we conclude today, I just want to remind you all that we sent you the Word document version of document 3, so you can type your notes there and kind of be prepared for the next questions coming up. And then if you revise any of your answers or want to organize them differently after what we talked about during the meeting, please feel free to do that in that document. And we would like to see those documents at the end after meeting number 7, and we'll put them together and kind of collate everything for all the members and put those out online. And then as a reminder, we got our meeting tomorrow. The times are up here in Pacific time. I know we're all over. And then we have another meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, which I do think we will end up needing to fill all of our good discussion that we're having. And then meeting number 8 is still to be scheduled. And again, on the next slide here, I put our contact information. These slides will be online, but please feel free to reach out to me and Dave at any time if you have questions or even about process, or if you have more thoughts about how we could change it in the future. I'd love to hear those thoughts. And then the next slide is just a reminder going forward for all the attendees that were listening in today. This is the same slide that JR shared at the beginning. There will be opportunities later on in the rulemaking for public comment, such as the public comment period specifically. And right now we're at this really important ATSAC step where we're getting a lot of technical feedback. And then I have a wrap-up slide on the next one. I just want to thank you all so much for your time today and thoughtful discussion. I know we sent you so much information. It was a lot to compile, and it was just really exciting to be able to kind of hear your feedback after your initial look at everything. And this, to me, was the exact conversation I was hoping for, that we can learn from. So this was really helpful to me to move forward. So thank you. That's all I have.
Awesome. Well, we'll give you a few minutes back in your life. It's just as we talked about, we'll open the room about 10 minutes early. So if folks want to get on and make sure all your tech and all that stuff's working, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a wonderful afternoon. Appreciate all the energy and expertise that we have around this table. So appreciate everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Great
you.
job.
Bye.
Bye.